What's up, you guys? This is Devin with Century Effects Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most popular strobing techniques, high-speed sync. Now, we're going to get right into it, but I need to tell you guys I'm not sponsored because I will be talking about different brands during this entire video, brands that I use for high-speed sync and why I use them for high-speed sync, but I don't want you guys to think that I'm sponsored or biased to any brand. I like using Canons, I like using FlashPoint as far as my syncing and my strobing and things of that nature, so let's get right into the video. Now, first we need to understand, what is high-speed sync. High-speed sync is essentially your flash's ability to sync with your camera at higher sync speeds or higher shutter speeds. So basically, when you connect your flash, you can go to higher shutter speeds. Now, why is this a big thing? Why aren't we able to always get like the higher shutter speeds like we used to? Well, you can't, because the flash actually happens at a certain speed, and then your shutter speed and your curtain happen at a certain time, and eventually it gets too fast. As a matter of fact, it gets too fast for the flash, and then the flash ends up catching the curtain of your shutter, and you end up getting a black band in your image, or some type of a black bar, or it's just dark on one part of your image and not the other. Why? Because your flash just caught your curtain at the same time, because your shutter speed becomes too fast for your actual flash. Now, with older flashes that didn't have this ability, or you didn't have any kind of communication or controller on top of your flash to send this information throughout each other, you had this all the time happening with the older flashes, with the older cameras. They could not do this ability. Now you have this technology where if you get the biggest flash, if you get the best flash, you automatically have this ability, and you might not even know you're using it. But it's always great to know exactly what you're doing to get the exact result that you want to get, because like I always say, it's all about controlling these cameras. It's not just about having the biggest, baddest camera. It's about having the control over not just your camera, but all your accessories and things that go along with your camera. Now, high-speed sync is one of the most sought-after techniques to use when you're strobing or using an artificial light source like a mono light or a speed light or some kind of strobing system, because it allows you to bring down the ambient exposure and have way more control over your ambient exposure than you would have if you didn't have high-speed sync. For example, because that might sound a little confusing to you, high-speed sync allows you to bring down the sunlight. Now, the sunlight outside, you might think, wow, the sunlight is really, really bright. Usually when I take my pictures, it's either bright in the background or dark in the foreground. Why? Because your camera can't actually weigh both of these exposures. Most cameras can't. Now, the newer cell phones can, because they have new software and technology that allows you to balance out the exposure, called HDR. But these newer cameras that are SLRs, DSLRs, they're slow to get to that software curve. So when you're actually strobing, they give you this ability to use your strobe at higher shutter speeds. Why? Because you offer light to your subject, which is with your strobe or your mono light or your speed light or whatever you're using on top of your camera. Now, the on-camera flash might not have this ability and probably doesn't have this ability. I've never seen that. But you get this ability to offer light to your subject, and then you have the ability to control all the other light around that subject with higher shutter speeds. Understand that your shutter speed will control your ambient light or your sunlight or the ambient light in the room, and then your f-stop or your aperture control will be controlling the actual flash output as it hits your subject. Well, mainly it's going to be people who take portraits. Portrait photographers, because they want to have nice light onto their subject, but they also want to control all the ambient light coming from the sun in the background, especially during springtime, summertime, when you don't really have that control. Now, when you're in springtime or summertime settings, you take your model or anybody that you're taking pictures of, or friends, family, whoever you're taking pictures of, you go outside and you have your strobe. You use your strobe either off camera or on camera, and you have high-speed sync, varying whichever way you want to use your flash. You could also use high-speed sync in the studio. This will give you the ability to shoot high speeds when you're taking pictures of models or anybody that's dancing, anybody that's really, really, moving at a higher pace, because usually when you're in the studio, you do pose, click, pose, click, pose, click. But that's not very fast. Probably at 1/200th of a second, maybe 1/160th of a second could get you the exact shutter speed that you need without having motion blur or any kind of movement in the image. And to think, all this stuff is posed, so the immediate time that you actually release your shutter, the model or the person that's posing for you is going to stop. So you don't really have to worry about images being motion blurred as long as you have that 125 and up shutter speed that you're looking for. You won't have that issue. Now, when you're in the studio and inside, you have a controlled environment, which means you can control all the lighting. But when you're outside, you're not able to do that. Now, when you're in the studio, you might need to actually bring down the ambient light a little bit more and then rely more on your flash power to create the image at higher f-stops. That's another reason why you will use high-speed sync. Or if you want to be outside and you want to open your aperture all the way up. So using high-speed sync indoors versus outdoors is slightly different, but at the same time, usually, I think 90% of the time, I use high-speed sync outdoors. Now, I had a video up yesterday. I was responding to one of my commenters. He or she said that, hey, I need a flash for real estate photography. And that was a really interesting question because usually I get it from portraiture, and I'm basically talking about portraiture on my channel. Well, I told them that they really need to look into that high-speed sync option with the FlashPoint system and things of that nature, because when you bring a whole bunch of light in from the window, your windows tend to look white in almost any given exposure when you're doing real estate photography. So if you use a flash, you're able to bring more fill light into that room and then bring the ambient light down so you can see the clouds outside the windows instead of seeing white backlit windows that probably bring in chromatic aberration, all these other artifacts that you don't want in your images. All right, so let's get into how to do high-speed sync. Now, if you have any of these devices that you know probably contribute to high-speed sync, bring them out right now and we'll go over them right now. Some of the things that you're gonna need for high-speed sync, of course, your DSLR camera or your DSLM or whatever camera that you have that has the ability to control the exposure triangle, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Now, once you have your camera out, my camera of choice, of course, is the Canon 5D Mark II. Now, you don't have to have a Canon 5D Mark II. All you have to have is some kind of SLR, DSLR, or mirrorless camera that allows you to control the actual exposure triangle, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. And it probably gives you modes like auto mode, manual mode, you know, any kind of semi-automatic mode like that. Now, since many people get into shooting high-speed sync with the Speedlight first, it's the most practical way to get into high-speed sync. So that's what we're going to use as our main example, because most people get into high-speed sync with the cheaper, more practical option of the Speedlight. Today, I have the Zoom Lithium Ion R2 from FlashPoint. Tried and true. I've never had any issues with this, charging it up with the lithium ion power, but it has high-speed sync and ETTL. It communicates directly with my camera, all the information that you would possibly need. It is not a manual-only flash. This will not work with a manual-only flash. You need a flash that's able to communicate and probably radio slave with your camera system. When you go to your Amazons, you're looking for a high-speed sync, ETTL, but you have to have the high-speed sync option. Chances are, if it has high-speed sync, it's automatically going to have ETTL because they're just a communicating system. They're sending information back and forth to the camera, letting them know how to meter the situation. Now, this is the on-camera option. Now, there's a more advanced option we're going to go over in just a second, but for most people, when they first start off with high-speed sync, they're only going to have a Speedlight flash, and they're going to have a DSLR or mirrorless camera that they're going to use this with. First thing you want to do, take your flash, put it on top of your camera, right? Once you get that flash or Speedlight nice and secured on top of your camera, bang, you should have something like this. Once you fire up your Speedlight and fire up your camera, I love to have it on manual mode. I wouldn't advise anybody else to use anything else with high-speed sync. And the reason being is because depending on how old or how new your camera is going to dictate how well it's going to work with its settings when you're incurring high-speed sync. So when you're using high-speed sync, certain cameras will work better than others because certain cameras have more age than other cameras. The older cameras tend to conflict a little bit with high-speed sync, depending on what mode you're in, how you're using it, things of that nature. But probably want to go to manual mode. And the reason why I advise manual mode, because you're always going to have control over pretty much everything you do when it comes to high-speed sync. And I can't advise that enough. Go back and watch my manual mode video about how to use manual mode. But once you get your speed light on your camera, the first thing you want to do is really look at the back of your speed light. Your speed light's probably going to say something like ETTL, and it's giving you your zoom function. You don't actually have to change much about your speed light. Typically, when you first cut it on, it's going to say ETTL. Go from that ETTL mode and look around your flash. See if you can find something that looks like a Thundershock with an H beside it. If you can find that Thundershock with an H beside it, then that means high speed sync. You hit that button will activate high speed sync for you. Or you can also go through the menu system and see if you see a phrase called sync, SYNC. That will give you the option to go to high speed sync or rear curtain sync. Rear curtain sync is like essentially the opposite of high speed sync. It's 3 triangles, but high speed sync is the option with the Thundershock and the H beside it. So don't go to rear curtain sync. You want to click it once or twice or 3 times, or how many other times you have to press it to get to the Thundershock and the H. Now this is a slight caveat. This is a pro tip. High speed sync is not like any other mode on your flash. High speed sync allows you to strobe the camera. Literally what you're doing with the speed lights, you're strobing many millionths of a second or many thousandths of a second. It's a whole bunch of strobes, okay? So this whole bunch of strobes action is going to allow that flash to defeat. High speed sync is a series of flashes faster than the eye can see to get around that whole curtain issue. So you'd have to think, if your flash is flashing a whole bunch of times, you're probably wasting a whole bunch of battery power. So know that when you're using high speed sync, you're going to be drilling that battery power, and if you're outside, you're probably going to be heating up that flash a lot. Even if you're inside, if you're using a whole bunch of high speed sync repetitively, it's probably going to heat up your flash. That's going to slow down your flash. You also need to know that if you are going to be draining a whole bunch of battery power, you're going to have to keep supplying this thing with batteries, especially if you're using a speed light. Now, my speed light is lithium ion powered. I don't typically have that issue, but if you're using a 4AA battery type of situation, you're going to need to understand you're going to need to bring backups to keep that consistent light quality. So now that you have your speed light on your camera, you want to start raising your shutter speed. Raise your shutter speed up. Don't take a picture yet. Just start to raise your shutter speed. If you get to the point where you're at about 1/200th of a second and it doesn't allow you to go any higher, that means you have not activated high speed sync. Now, some third-party flashes struggle with high speed sync because it's about direct communication with a brand of camera that is not the same brand. Now, some third-party cheap manufacturers don't implement high speed sync well with the big boy cameras like Canon, Nikon, and Sony. Why? Because they're not the same camera company. They have to do a lot of research and R&D to make sure that their device works well with the camera. But since it's third party and it doesn't cost as much, they don't put a lot of money into it, you might have a bum flash. Even though it says it's on high speed sync and it does high speed sync, it doesn't mean that it works well with your camera, or you might just have a bum copy. That happened to me once with my Yongnuo 600 version. So you might want to really investigate and make sure your flash does high speed sync. You should be able to get high speed sync in most modes, manual mode, ETTL mode, but you probably won't be able to get high speed sync in optical slave mode. You probably won't be able to get high speed sync in multi-strobographic mode either. All right, so you got your camera attached to your flash. If you're able to get higher shutter speeds than 1/60th of a second and 1/200th of a second, as a matter of fact, you should probably be all the way up to 4,000th of a second, 1/8000th of a second. If your camera can reach that high in shutter speed, you should be able to activate it with your camera, with the flash on top, with high speed sync activated. Now, if high speed sync is not activated, you're not able to get these shutter speeds while your flash is on, while it's on top of your camera. That means you don't have the ability to use high speed sync because your camera won't allow your flash to, or your flash doesn't have the option to. Now, if you have an advanced enough flash, you're able to actually access some settings through the camera about your flash because it's communicating all this information throughout the flash. It's its own communicating ecosystem. That's what you want. And you should be able to take a picture and set your settings varyingly. Now, since it's on ETTL, you should have a relatively good exposure. You don't have to have it on ETTL. You can have it on manual mode. You can have it on whatever you want to have it on except multi-strobographic and optical slave mode. And you should be able to use high-speed sync. Not every flash is the same, not every speed light is the same, not every mono light is the same, and not every one of these devices has the ability to use high-speed sync. Most of the newer devices will give you the option to get the high-speed sync ETTL version or just the manual version without all that communication. That's usually the general gist of buying strobes and higher speed devices that allow you to get those high-speed sync attributes. All right, for those of you who just have a speed light, those of you who just have an on-camera flash, you're pretty much dismissed. This next part is for advanced people who want to take their flash off camera and use it remotely, which I believe should be everybody, especially the newbies who are trying to get into flash. You need to learn how to get it off camera. So here are two controllers that I have. I have the FlashPoint R2 Canon version. Now, I'm not going to bring it close to the camera because why? This is the Panasonic and I got it on manual focus. And then I also have the R2 Pro trigger. Both of these triggers are able to do high speed sync. This trigger is about what I would say 40 to 60 bucks on Amazon or Adorama or wherever you purchase it from. This one gets closer to about $90 to $100, or I think $75 to about $90, depending on where you get it from. I don't know the exact specs, but nevertheless, both of these triggers can do high-speed sync. You might be saying, Devin, well, why are you using the FlashPoint system? Yes, this is the FlashPoint system because FlashPoint has these R2 triggers. I can use this one trigger and trigger my mono light. I can also trigger my speed light, and I can trigger my advanced speed light, which is the FlashPoint Lithium Ion X. Right now, I'm using the Pro. I'm getting used to this. I'm probably going to do a review on this sometime soon, but I'm loving this R2 Pro trigger. Now, if you want to know more information about FlashPoint, you need to go to Robert Hall Photography. He's the one who got me into FlashPoint because Robert Hall, even though he works with FlashPoint all the time, he gives it rave reviews, and he will actually tell you when he doesn't agree with something. So it's not like you just blind loyalty. So this cheaper one obviously is more simple. This cheaper one is simpler than the Pro trigger, but it does pretty much essentially the same thing except a little bit more stripped down. Now here with this R2 trigger, the way we do high-speed sync is even simpler than doing it on top of the flash. As a matter of fact, it should do it automatically. Some of these newer controllers and triggers have this automatic high-speed sync function, to where you should just be able to go to higher shutter speeds at your own whim without having to worry about activating anything, and then it should tell the flash to do everything it needs to do to get that high-speed sync look. You see what I'm saying? So just like using your camera, you could just go automatically to high-speed sync. But I went through this whole thing to show you guys exactly how to do high-speed sync in any situation, because not everybody's situation is the same, especially since we're using different devices. Now, most triggers have the high-speed sync signal on there, the Thundershock within H, but if you do not have that, just start to roll that shutter speed up to higher shutter speeds. You always want to test this. Go up to, 1/1000th of a second, 2,000th of a second, 4,000th, 8,000th of a second, and see if you get a shutter band in your image. You need to be able to trigger that flash off camera first, and then go to higher shutter speeds with that flash close to your subject or relatively close to your subject to make sure that light is being registered to the camera. Once you go ahead and do that, you're able to use high-speed sync. If you don't see a black band, you're doing it successfully. If you see a dark, distinct part of the image where it's really, really dark and it's dark for no reason, that means your high-speed sync is not activated, and you need to look in your manual, to look on your remote to see how to activate high-speed sync if you can. See, the thing about high-speed sync is you have to have all of the devices in harmony. They all have to talk to each other at all points in time. It can't be, oh, I'm just using a regular, cheap controller and it's optically saving something else, or it's sending a signal to something else. You have to know exactly what you're doing. See, the thing about high-speed sync is all your devices have to talk to each other in harmony, whether it be your camera to your controller, whether it be your controller to your speed light or your mono light or whatever strobe you're using. It has to, because it's sending it so much information that it has to all be in sync and in harmony with each other. Now, if you're using an off-brand or just some kind of a radio popper or a pocket wizard that doesn't have the communication with your flash, then it may not work right for you. You might have the flash and it might work on top of your camera doing high-speed sync, but it may not work off camera with a third-party remote or a remote that was not designed for that flash. Most brands like FlashPoint and Canon and Nikon, especially Canon, Nikon, Sony, all the big brands, any brands that actually make speed lights and flash systems, they tend to be proprietary in the sense that they only want you to use the controllers that go with their flashes. You see what I'm saying? So that keeps you buying into their stuff. You see what I'm saying? So if you have this type of flash, you need this type of controller to go with this type of flash. So this becomes a big problem when people start to buy multiple flashes. Typically people want around 3 flashes. Why? Because it matches the 3-point lighting setup. The traditional interview style, 3-point lighting setup where you're taking pictures of a person, you got a light, a fill, a main, and a accent or background light or something like that. Now, when you start to build your Speedlight toolbox, you're going to need a controller that controls all of them. And then on top of that, you're going to need to understand that once you have flashes off camera, you're going to have stands and brackets that hold those flashes off camera securely so they won't fall, because that's happened to me before. You also want to know that moving from flash to flash is going to be a little bit of a hindrance. So you're going to have a controller. This is why I purchased the R2 trigger that allows me, it shows me a display of all my flashes at any point in time, what they're doing, whether they're in beep mode, whether they're in high-speed sync mode, whether they're on, whether they're, you see what I'm saying? And I can Bluetooth my own lighting ratios into this. Now, for those of you who I might have blown your mind right there, just know that I can control all the power of all my flashes. And with the lighting ratio thing, I can actually set up the power and the distances. I can just set the distances and set the power by like pretty much like 1 or 2 clicks of a button. And I can get the exact same look that I had, because shooting with powerful strobes, you can actually create your own light. But that's just me being hype. I'm getting off subject. But know that all your information, all your communication, and all your devices have to be pretty much cohesive and in harmony with one another. That's another reason why I bought the R2 trigger system with FlashPoint, because I know that this R2 trigger system can control all of my lights with one controller. So if I want to use my FlashPoint Explorer 600 with my FlashPoint Lithium Ion Zoom X, or my FlashPoint Lithium Ion, just the regular version, I can use all 3 of them with one controller and control the power of all of them. I can control high-speed sync throughout all of them. I can even control the modeling lamps and a whole bunch of other things about my strobes through this R2 Trigger Pro. And like I said, guys, I am not sponsored. I just love this product because we've never really been able to do this on a mass scale. We've never had products like this on a mass scale. And the last bit of information, guys, you need to understand that not every flash controller goes with every flash. And then not every flash controller has high-speed sync. So, for example, if I were to use my Pocket Wizards, I can't use high-speed sync on my older Pocket Wizards, my Pocket Wizard Plus X's, because they don't have the ability to send high-speed sync signals to a flash, or any type of flash for that matter. Now, maybe in a more advanced Pocket Wizard might have this ability, but those don't. I use the FlashPoint R2 triggering system. The R2 stands for something. It tells you exactly which style of what you need to buy. So if I am shooting with the FlashPoint system, if I know I need to use the R2 triggering system for my R2 light, I'll get an R2 controller. I'll get an R2 mono light. I'll get an R2 this, and R2 that, and R2 that. That naming process is extremely important when it comes to buying devices for high-speed sync and communicating with your flash. So even if it's just ETTL, you need to have something that communicates that to your camera here and there and everywhere, whether it be 1 flash, 2 flashes, 3 flashes, 4 flashes, all of them. Now, there's other ways you can control flashes, but you have to understand what information is sent from that flash to that controller. For example, if I have my R2 controller here, bang, if I have my R2 controller here, and then I put my R2 regular controller under a Speedlight, because you have this hot shoe adapter here. If I put this under a random Speedlight, and then put my R2 controller my R2 controller on top of my camera, I can command that flash probably no matter what it will be. It could be some generic old brand, it could be a Canon flash or whatever. I can probably control it with this and this together while you put your flash on top of this one. That's why this is so nifty, because it can control flashes that are not even in its brand, long as you have this one on here and another commander commanding this. But you may not have all the functionality that you think. You might not have ETTL on there, especially if the flash doesn't have ETTL. You might not have the ability to do high-speed sync, especially if the flash doesn't have that ability. These things are not, some miraculous piece of magic. It's not going to give the actual flash the ability to do something that it can't do already. It's not going to make that happen. Now, some new technology I heard from Pocket Wizard, which I have not confirmed, does give you this ability to add hypersync to maybe a flash or something like that. I think there's something like that. And then there's also some technology in FlashPoint that give you this high sync ability, which allows your flash to flash at the right time instead of strobing so many times like high speed sync allows you to do. To save battery power, they have this new technology called high sync, and it makes it perfect when you flash instead of wasting all those flashes. But I haven't confirmed it and I haven't tested it, so I'm not going to lead you guys astray. I'm done with Century FX Studios, guys. I got a lot of equipment in my lap. But thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I know this is a long video, but this is essentially the ultimate guide for using high-speed sync. I don't have your devices. I don't know what you're going through, and I don't know what you're shooting, but I'm trying to appease everybody. So if you have a specific situation like the guy did or the girl did for real estate, or you're shooting inside a studio but you still want to use high-speed sync and you're not just shooting outside, or you're on camera, off camera, you have different devices, let me know in the comments below and I'll use my experience of shooting to answer your question. I'm done with Century FX Studios, and thanks for watching, guys.